Alright, let's just do a mic check and make sure you guys can hear me okay. Nice. Alright. So, we are on the, let's see, we have 4 weeks left. 3 of those are lessons. So this week, next week, and the following week. And then we're on to the final. And then that's it. You guys are off for a couple of weeks before you head into your summer semesters. If you're doing the summer semester. I don't know if you guys have a summer semester or you're in co-op. It seems to shift depending on the class. But yeah, either way, we're almost close to the break, which is exciting. So we're into the home stretch of the hardest parts of PHP, which will be authentication, which we have 2 weeks of authentication. And then in our last week, we're going to talk about file management. So that's what we've got on the dock right for today. You'll notice that I have a whole bunch of things in this folder. Kind of like everything all at once. We have a quiz, we have a lab, and we have our PHP major projects. So 3 things all put into play. The quiz is super simple. It's only 7 questions. The lab won't take a lot of time. Just follow through what you're supposed to do. Make sure you download the lab files, right? This lab is going to cover 3, 4, and 5 all in one go. So like 15 marks right there. So just keep that in mind. So it's a big hefty mark, which is good because it helps me in the fact that I only have to mark 1 lab, and it helps you guys in the fact that you only have to do 1 lab. So the project though, the project is super big, right? It's worth a huge part of your grade. So you're basically going to go through and just follow in what it says to do here. The instructions are actually in the files themselves. So if you open up the files, you can read the instructions, and then you know exactly what to do. There is SQL already provided, I believe. At least I think there is. Or maybe this isn't giving you files. I now can't remember. Oh boy. Let's see here. You're going to have a project part 1. Oh yeah, right there. There's the zip. So download the zip. Go through each of the files, follow the instructions, and then build out your application. I believe, though, it's literally anything you want to build. It's been a while since I've seen this one. Yep, that's fine. Participants will demonstrate their knowledge of basic CRUD operations in PHP using the following provided files. I'm pretty sure you have the control of building whatever you want. Let's just double check. I mean, it takes 2 seconds to open it up. Unless I provide you SQL that makes it harder to see. I don't know. Let's just throw it in Notepad. Let's see here. Create your database. Create a table called supers with the following fields. And then create your table below this line. You know what? I'm going to change that slightly. You don't have to create a table called supers if you don't want to. If you want to make it something, just something that you want to make, so you can show it off, feel free to do that. You can make whatever project you want and just kind of show off your own thing if you want. Just make sure you use the files that are there, and you can modify them as you need to. Can we do it individual, or is it mandatory group? No, it's not group-based at all. It's individual. Yeah, they're like steps. Yeah, if you look at it, it's basically steps. Let me open it up. I mean, it takes a few seconds to do that. Open up. It's kind of annoying to open these up because you can't really, like... You have to just pray that it opens in the correct thing. Yeah, the quiz is as a single try. Alright. Here's the instructions. Wow, like every file in this thing is open. There you go. So here's the instructions. You'll find this in the instructions file. If you have VS Code, you can actually click a thing that shows you the preview. Sorry, what? 1 question at a time. 1 question at a time. Just take the test, dude. It walks you through it. It's 1 question at a time. Alright, the participants will demonstrate their knowledge of basic CRUD operations in PHP. You must use the files provided. You can add more. You must implement each file's requirements. Let's see. Don't pay attention to any of the group stuff. All of that is null and void. You are not allowed to work in a group. You must be individual. Keep that in mind. I don't know why I didn't change this instruction. I thought I had changed it, but maybe I forgot to. The instructions that are in the project on Blackboard are correct. These instructions are incorrect for the most part. So all you do, it tells you what the file name is that you need to edit. So if you go to that file for connect.php, here's your function. You need to make whatever modifications you need in order to get connect.php to work. Here's your admin, your authenticate. Wait, hold on. This is the wrong thing. This isn't even the project. Oh boy. That is not the project. Not even a little bit. Hold on. Let me fix that. You know what? Let's just fix it like that. I will re-upload the project. No, don't be nervous about it. It's going to be nice and easy. I'll re-upload it. I got to find the right thing. I thought I loaded the correct file, but obviously I didn't. The project's basically filled out. You just need to go in and fill in your little pieces to it, and off it goes. It works. In theory, it'd take you about a day, maybe in total. So not ridiculous amounts of time. Obviously, there's always the scenarios where you get into a black hole and it just kind of goes down into the rabbit hole, so to speak, and then you're trying to fix things. If you find yourself in a rabbit hole, I mean, that's what Slack's for. Reach out to me, reach out to your friends. You know, you can reach out to people and ask them what they did or whatever and try to get some support. I'm totally a big believer in industry support. Okay, so just to complete steps, right? Yeah, whatever the steps are. Some of the steps are logic-based, though. So it might be like, implement this. That's a step, for example. So it's not necessarily like, correct this line or add this variable. Sometimes the steps are expecting you to do multiple things all at once. Yeah. That's the thing. I used to kind of be the guy that was like, here's a project and here's like literally every single thing you need to do line by line. And then I was like, this is stupid. These are computer programmers. They're guys that are going out into the industry. I should be able to give you a logic-based question, and you should be able to fix logic-based question. That's the way it works, right? Because if you go out in the industry and you sit down and somebody says, hey, I need you to implement X, and you're like, okay, well, just give me all the steps to implement X, and then I'll go ahead and implement X. That's not how it works, right? It's literally as vague as you need to implement X. Go to it. That's the way it works. So just keep that in mind when you're working on any type of project, that you should really be trying to achieve more than what the project's expectations are, so to speak. All right, so last week we talked a little bit about APIs. We didn't talk a little bit. We talked a lot about APIs. Super confusing topic for everybody involved, including the other two groups. They like it. I didn't have any lesson things on it. I don't know why I'm looking in here. They liked it, but it's funny how different groups are from groups, right? So I've got a couple of people in the other two groups that like took and ran with it, and now they're implementing it into their projects that Jessica Gilfillan assigned them, implementing full core REST systems, which is like cool. That's exactly what I would love to see you do, but obviously I don't have that expectation because it was a lot. Yeah, I get that. You know, it's a lot to cover and it's a lot to understand. That being said, though, I think if I was to teach it again, I probably just wouldn't. I would just choose an API that already exists, like working with Google reCAPTCHA or something like that instead, and just implement that and say forget it to the REST API. That being said, though, it was good exposure for you guys because you have JavaScript in 2 semesters. In 3 semesters. You have JavaScript frameworks, which is all of what we talked about, pretty much. But it's all done using JavaScript and Node. So, and you'll build a full API system entirely from scratch with routing and the whole bit. Not quite as... Actually, I would say arguably it's more difficult than it was in what we did. I would say arguably it's a little bit more difficult. Just because it's asynchronous. But anyways, I would definitely be, during your break, if you are off for co-op, I would definitely be doing some self-learning on APIs. As the industry uses them constantly, and you're never going to get away from them. Yeah, good luck with that. I don't know if I'm teaching. I haven't decided yet. I'm taking a semester off for sure. I'm not sure if I'm coming back. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. I'm debating because I have a good job, I make good money, and this was kind of like a little bit of a bump in income. Plus, I love teaching. I really do enjoy it, and I love, helping people and mentoring people, but it's a lot in a week. Like, it works out, like, with these 4 classes, I'm working about an 80-hour week, and I'm just burnt out. I just need a break. So if I do come back, it'll be like 1 class. I will do 1 class. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, I'll let you guys know though. I'll always post it if that's the case. Do you see this weird white block down here? I have no idea what's causing that. Oh, there we go. See, it's Workbench sitting in the background there, being sneaky. All right, so yeah, we talked about APIs. We're not going to recap on APIs because it's not going to be on the test. It's not a part of your project. It's really not anything. Looking back at it, I kind of wish I hadn't have done it, but the other instructor, she teaches APIs as well, so I guess it's a requirement of the course. But it's such a complicated subject that it's kind of difficult to teach. All right, so what are we going to do tonight? Tonight, we are going to learn about authentication. We're going to talk about basically building walls between our information and the outside world, right? So basically creating like little stopping points so people can't access our stuff. That's what we're going to learn about tonight, and that's called authentication, and that's going to basically carry for 2 weeks. Tonight we'll cover introducing authentication and registering a user, and then likely logging in a user. Then next week we'll cover authenticating views and actions and logging out a user. So it might be a short class because the whole lesson is just that. Let me just double check and make sure I'm not forgetting something. Oh, parent-child relationships. That's what I'm forgetting about. Right. Yeah. So we're going to actually accompany that as well. So we'll create our user with authentication, and then next week will be our parent-child relationships utilizing that authentication. All right. So let's get started. So first of all, let's go to lesson 8-9. It's all one. Grab these starter files here and download them. Show those in your folder, obviously. And extract them, if I can extract them properly. So there we go. I've got a student folder here. I'm just going to double click in there. That's where all my files are. And then I'm going to boot up WAMP here. There's 5 in total. So that will cover the remaining 3. And as for the quizzes, if we don't wind up covering all the quizzes, which I don't think we will, whatever ones that are left over, I'll just exempt. So not a big deal. All right, I'm going to click on this and open my www directory. So it's open. And open up that other folder there. And I'm going to dive into my Comp 1006 directory, and I'm going to create a new directory. I'm just going to call it Lesson 08, but it will be Lesson 8 and 9. I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to take all of these files I just downloaded and move them over. Then I'm going to right-click in here and open with code. And hopefully it's not all filled out, which I'm kind of worried it might be. Nope. Nope. Yeah, it looks like we're good. The only thing that's filled out is this admin section, which you guys can actually delete that one because that's not for you. It's not for this group. So the admin.php and admin SQL and the seed admin, those 3 directories, or those 3 files, admin.php, admins.sql, and cdamin, go ahead and delete those. Those are for the other group. Because Jessica requires a like 2 different versions of authentication. One of them is called basic authentication. There's another one called digest authentication, and then there's form authentication. We're not covering basic authentication or digest authentication because it's not very commonly used. The only places I've ever seen it used are either in poorly architected like applications, or on occasion in IT-related things, like where they're blocking IT resources. That's the only times I've really seen those. We're not going to cover that because it's not something that you really encounter. However, what you will encounter is form authentication, which is what we're going to spend our time on. Cool, so you should have that down now. If you want to follow along, there is the lesson plan there as well. Alright, let's talk about things. Actually, we should load our website up, right? It's always a good idea to load the website up. We'll just go to localhost /comp-1006, hit enter, click on lesson 8, and if you're at the registry, you've got this really nice, I mean, let's face facts, this is a dead sexy CSS. You gotta admit that. It looks so slick. See, you click and they like push in, right? Click and they push in. I love that. Isn't that awesome looking? And the text is all nicely recessed. Yeah, definitely. Humana. Alright, we're going to shrink this down a little bit, though, because it's kind of a little big. It's kind of a little big. And we want more room for the real estate. Alright, let's try that again. There we go. More real estate for code. Alright, so the registry, become the elite. The registry is a collection of world-renowned individuals who are masterful in their craft. Couldn't be more vague, though, eh? But it's awesome. So what can we do with the registry? Well, right now, we can click on login. Oh, cool, there's a login page there. Can I log in? Nope. Got some issues. Let's try to see if we can log in. Password's probably ASDF. Login. Blank page. Alright, so it looks like we got some work to do ahead of us. What about the registry? Oh, the registry's pretty cool. Widen this a little bit. So we've got our first name, our last name, the email addresses, and then the registration. So we can try to fill that out. Alright, ASDF@ASDF.com. ASDF. Register. Looks like we're still not working there. So that's cool. We have other pages in here, but we can't access them because there's no links to them. We could always click up here and access them, though. We could go to profile.php if we wanted to. I mean, what happens if we do? Profile.php. Oh, just broken things. Lots of broken things. And a logout button, which goes nowhere. Okay, so we obviously have some work ahead of us. So let's talk a little bit about authentication. So why do we use authentication? Well, authentication helps us to restrict access to content and functionality within our online application, right? That's its entire purpose. Authentication is a strong part of the software web development. Without authentication, the entire internet would be public, which is what some people want. Some people really want full public access to all of the internet, including things like your Facebook account and stuff like that. Things that you consider secure, that you prefer your privacy, they want access to. The problem with that, though, is that obviously, how do you restrict posting things to Facebook or posting things to Twitter or things like that so that they're only coming from you? Because that's the other side to authentication. When we authenticate, we also create a level of personalization. There are various strategies to authentication. The simplest, and the one that we're going to be using, is just uses your email address and a password. These details are usually stored in a database for easier access. Because databases, while fairly secure, can be hacked, passwords are generally hashed or encrypted. Encrypted is not good. Hashed is good. Encrypted means can be decrypted, right? So if I encrypt a password, I can decrypt that password. If I run it through an algorithm one way, it can always be reversed through an algorithm and come out the other side. So hash is a bit different. The way hashing works is it's one-way encryption. So it only gets encrypted one way. You can't decrypt it. It's impossible to decrypt. So it only gets hashed in one way. So the better of these two methods, obviously, is hashing over encryption. Hashing is one-way unidirectional method of cryptography. This means the information can be encrypted but never decrypted. This renders the information useless to anyone who finds it because they can download it all they want, but without knowing exactly how to compare against it or what the original password was, there's no real means for them to decrypt it, and they wouldn't waste their time. They would just move on. There's other strategies such as digest or basic auth. You may have encountered these before when you go to a website and a little drop down pops down from the top of your browser, and it's a browser dialog window, and it comes up and says password and username and password, and you fill out those pieces of information. That's called basic authorization. There's also digest authorization, which uses a form of encryption to go back and forth. However, both are fairly, not many people use them because they're not very user-friendly. They're also prone to attacks and stuff, so they're not all that great. The other big one that, I was kind of surprised that the other instructor didn't mention this. The other big one is authentication through API tokens. That's a huge one. This is where you actually provide a password and login. The system endpoint sends you an API token that usually has an expiration on it, and then using a combination of your API token plus a secret key that you've been provided before, you use those two pieces to authenticate every operation you do after that point. Once you're done, though, usually the API token expires unless you save it. If you save it, then generally what you can do is use the same API token and your secret key to re-request new API tokens every time you join back up, as long as the expiration hasn't succeeded. API token authentication is probably the number one main way to authenticate when you're dealing with APIs. So that API that we built, if we were to actually make it more public, we wouldn't want people creating, updating or deleting in there necessarily. We would create an API token system for people to use so they could authenticate against our API. That's usually what happens. There's also something called JWT, which stands for JSON Web Tokens. JSON Web Tokens are a little different. Basically, you authenticate with a endpoint. They send you a JWT. You store your JWT and use it to authenticate any further operations from that point. It's like another version of API tokenization. The reason why it's so popular, though, is because it's utilized a lot in the front end with React or Vue or Ember or any front end React system, like any front end web component system. They really like JWTs, and they become extremely popular. They're also considerably simpler to use than using API tokens. API tokens generally require like a two handshake operation in order to work, and that gets a little confusing for people that are brand new to APIs. Plus, it usually requires involving other libraries such as OAuth and stuff like that. So JWT definitely simplifies that. You guys will learn about JWT when you take your JavaScript Frameworks course. And if you have me, you will definitely learn about it because we authenticate with password and username, and then we send back a JWT, and then every request we make after that we use the JWT. But not in this class. So, authentication is constantly being analyzed by both security experts and hackers, right? The simple username password isn't enough due to complex bots who can attempt brute force attacks by applying a dictionary of usernames and a dictionary of passwords against your application. One common problem with users, right? Remember, I'm the person that always tells you, never trust the user, because the user is either one of two types of people. They are either a hacker or they're a moron. Because you can't trust the user and you can't trust the data you get from them, it's so important that you validate, sanitize, and normalize, right? Well, the same occurs when we talk about authentication. We need to be cautious that we don't trust our user too much to not try to brute force their way into our system. We also need to kind of not trust that the user isn't using the same username and password on other systems, right? Which is very bad. So they can be using the same username and password combination for their Netflix account, their bank account, maybe their stock trading site, whatever they're doing that with. And what happens if a hacker was to hack our system and manage to gain access to that information, it's not necessarily our system they want access to, it's that password login that they can now go use to access their Netflix or access their Gmail or whatever. That's why a lot of sites have started implementing things like two-factor authentication, which basically enforces the idea that when you go to connect, you have to authorize it a second time through an app on your phone. Sites that don't do that often will do things like force you to provide them your cell phone number so that they can send you a text message, or they'll send you an email authentication like Steam does, for example. They'll send you an email authentication that you have to then verify that email account, right? So those are super handy ways to deal with the public that accidentally has used their same email password combo everywhere and they've been hacked at some point. So the username password strategy. Let's talk a little bit about what that actually looks like. Here's the username password strategy. So below, wait, what? When aren't hackers trying to disrupt the systems? That's right, exactly. And the thing is they don't really care about, that woman or that guy's blog, and that, they don't care about your blog. That's not what they care about. They care about the users that are commenting on your blog, because the passwords and emails that they've used to, register with your blog could then definitely give them provisions towards grabbing other data, right? Like their email addresses, or what else could they grab? Their Netflix accounts, their Prime, or whatever, right? Incidentally, one of my sons was downloading Minecraft skins from a not so reputable website, and he used to register with the site, he used our email address he used my email address actually, and our Netflix password. And so he used that combo because that's the combo he knew. So he put it in. So sure enough, after about like a month or so, we went into Netflix, and you know how you have like the different user things, right? We had a new one, written in like Russian, and I couldn't read it, right? And so I'm like, oh, fantastic, we've been hacked, right? And sure enough, they had their own profile set up and everything else. They weren't very smart because they set up their own profile. If they had never set up their profile and just used our profiles, I would never have known. Never, right? Like, it wouldn't have crossed my mind. But they were using their own profile, so then I had to go and change the password and everything else. Yeah, it was a big pain in the butt. What they need to do is create shareable passwords. So like a one-time shareable password. So you give it to a kid, they put it into their phone, it registers that device, and that's it. Only that device can be accessed with that username and password. It can't be accessed from any other system. I've always thought that disposable passwords is what I call it. Disposable passwords would be an awesome implementation in sites like that. All right, moving on. So this is my wonderful diagram here, and it basically shows that we have to think from the perspective that we have two sides of an application, right? We have a public side of an application, and we have a non-public side of an authentication. And we have this wall that runs up through the center, right? It's a wall that you can't access, that you can't get through. It has a gateway, a guarded gateway, that blocks you from accessing the authenticated side. Let's take a look at some of the things that we're looking at on this side. These little documents here that you see, this icon represents something visible, right? Something you can actually view. The ones with the gears, I call them processing scripts, right? So basically what they do is there's nothing visible, they just process something. Process something and then send you off somewhere else. So we have to kind of think, what are the things that we require to be public? Well, we want our homepage to be public because we obviously probably want to sell something, right? We want them to, draw their attention to our website. Come to our website. Come see our stuff. We need a login page to be public, but how else did they log in? If the login page was on the other side of the wall, there's no way for them to be able to log in, right? So they need a login page on this side of the wall. We need a registration page. It doesn't necessarily need to be on this side of the wall. It could be by invitation only. I have seen sites like that before where you get invited to register with the website. They give you a temporary link that expires after a period of time or after a single use. You register using that temporary link, which means you're on this side of the wall already. And then once you've registered, you're good to go and you can access this content. However, we're going to make ours simple. We're just going to put the registration on this side of the wall. And then we have notifications. Notifications are going to have to go to everybody, right? So say I log in and I use the wrong credentials. I don't want to fire them on this side of the wall just to access the notifications. So we put notifications on the public side. Or if I register and, I don't validate properly, then obviously we want to make sure that it stays on this side. But what about these processing scripts you see here, right? Authenticate and insert. Why are these public? Well, because we need to be able to authenticate the user before we authenticate the user, right? We can't get them on the other side of the wall, because if they're on the other side of the wall, they'd already have to be logged in order to authenticate, right? It doesn't make sense. So we need to authenticate them first before we pass them through the wall. And with the registration, same idea. We're going to register them, and then we need to insert that record into the database, and then we might let them through the wall. This kind of workflow works a little differently, though, because you insert them into the database, log them in, and then pass them through. Not all websites do that. They usually register, insert it into the database with a temporary flag. Then they direct an email to your email account for you to respond to. And the reason why they do that is because they don't want to put the user into the database if it's just a bot, right? It's just a bot filling out forms and trying to get submitted into a database. They want to kind of block those kind of actions. Legitimate users, that's what you want. Once you're on this side of the wall, then you can access things that make sense from a secure location. Show your profile, edit your profile, delete yourself if you want to, update your profile, or log out, right? Makes sense that log out is on the authenticated side from a user experience perspective, not necessarily a security perspective, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter if this is on this side because clicking log out doesn't change the state that you're in, right? It's actually considered idempotent operation because it doesn't change what you're doing. So the first thing that we're going to tackle tonight is registering a user, right? Because we can't do any of this if we're not registered. So we're going to need a few things. Actually, like a few bunch of things. So the first thing we're going to need to do is open up our MySQL Workbench. And I think we'll create a brand new database for this tonight, just to make life nice and easy. Because we're going to be working on this for the next few weeks. I just want to get closed, darn you. Close, 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 close. The little X on these things is not in the most wonderful location. It's very touchy, and you just have to like nail it dead on or it doesn't work. Do I control plus on this one? I forget. All right, so we're going to create a new database. The way I do that is I just right click, create schema. We're going to call it the dash registry. All one word. I'll give you that. So we're going to create a database called the registry. We'll click apply. I'm happy with that. We'll click apply. We'll click finish. So we now have our new database called the registry. Go ahead and double click on that so it highlights it. And then we're going to create a new SQL file. And we're going to add our SQL into this. So let's go grab the users.sql. And we'll plug it into here. So just a quick understanding of what's happening in this file. We have an ID column, right? That's the unique identifier for our user. We have a first name and a last name, right? An email address that we're going to use as a username. And the reason why we're using the email address as the username is because your email address should be unique to you. No two users have the same email address necessarily, or they shouldn't, right? I mean, there is sometimes that you get that super sappy couple that has to have the same email address, right? And that's fine, whatever. To each is their own, for sure. Password, right? Notice the password size is 255 characters. That's because we want to be able to support any algorithm of encryption. So, and we definitely want to, like, not encrypt it, we want to hash it, right? So we want to support any size of a hash that we really can. We've set a couple of indexes here. We have our primary key, which means that it's indexed by the primary key, right? That also means it has to be unique. It can't be any other, like you can't have two IDs of 1 or 3 or whatever. They have to be unique. And then we have a unique key that we've identified, which is our email address. This basically prevents users from accidentally creating a duplicate account, right? So we can kind of say, hey, whoa, you already have an account with us. Just use that account. You don't need to create another one. So that's what that's for. That basically helps us limit people from creating new accounts when they already are registered. So we can go ahead and click this little lightning bolt. This is just so, right, so you have to give it a name. This is kind of weird. When you're creating keys, you have to give them names. So this index requires a name to be associated with the index. Yeah, it's just a reference name. The reference name is this kind of shorthand, index underscore user's email. I don't usually do that. Usually what I do, I'm kind of bad for this, I tend to just call it email, right? I don't actually call it that, but I guess I should. It's supposed to be what it is, which is an index, the table you're associating it to, and then the name of it. But that's just a convention that's common. Yeah. Anyways, click your little lightning bolt. Whatcha? We created a table called users. If we refresh, you should get the little checkbox or the chevron, and you should see users in there now. There's our users with all of their columns. So right now with our registry, we have this registry page. This is our intro page, and there's nothing we need to do with it. If you do want to edit it for any reason, you can find it under index.php, right? So you could modify it if you wanted it to. You could call it whatever you wanted to. I could call it Sean's registry. And it doesn't change because I'm not in the right page for some weird reason. That's interesting. Oh, it did change. It changed up here. Notice I spelled registry wrong as well. There's no E in registry. It helps if we don't change that title, but actually change the real title. So here, Sean's registry. Bam! I did it. I made it Sean's registry. Now I'm going to click register. Registration, all the fun, all the glory. Registration will provide you access to literally the best site on the planet, nay, the galaxy, nay, the universe, right? This is a cataclysmic website, just by the terminology alone, even though it doesn't do very much. All right, we can try to register a user, but it's not going to work, obviously. We're going to have issues registering our user. So there's a couple of what's the word I'm looking for? There's a couple of value things that we're going to create here. Some life conveniences. That's what I'm talking about. One thing I would like to do is that when we come to this page, if we've already attempted to register and we come back to this page, or it sends us back to this page, it should fill out these fields for us as much as possible. Not the password fields, because ideally those should remain empty. You should be forced to type in your password every time you have to come back to this page, but the other fields should have some information in them. So there's a few ways that we can do this. The easiest way to do this, if we open up our register.php, is we want to check something called form values. And we're going to create this variable called form values, but we're going to store it in a super handy variable for us. There's a variable that we use, a super global variable called session. And the cool thing about session is that it sticks around for the length of time that your browser is open. Not even necessarily the length of time the tab is open, right? You can close the tab, go to another tab, come back, and the session will still be here for you. But the second you close your browser, your session will disappear and you will no longer have it. The reason why session is so important is because the web is stateless. When we switch from page to page, like when I go to login or I go to register, any variables that we define with JavaScript or anything that we were to change, so say for example I wanted to change registration so it was pink, I could come in here, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit because that's a little big for me, but I can come in here and I can say, oh, color, I'm going to ruin this dude's website, pink, haha, now it's pink, hope he likes the color pink, sucker, right? And I've hacked him, right? I've done this hacky thing. But the problem is the second I refresh, because the browser is stateless, the pink no longer applies, right? So you need some way to be able to store that state. And the only way to store that state is either in the database or in session variables. Session variables are also super secure because they're controlled by the server, right? That sucks, make it pink again. Session variables are controlled by the server. They're not controlled by your browser, right? So you can't set session variables here. You have to set them on the server itself, right? Here, I'll do you a solid, Alec. There you go. It's pink. Now it's permanently pink because we actually modified the code, right? So we've actually adjusted it so that state stays pink, right? So we want to be able to access session variables, and there's reasons why. The reason I want session variables is because I want to be able to store information about our user. When our user logs in, I kind of need to keep track of that in some way. So the easiest way to keep track of that is by using session variables. We could also use cookies, but cookies are not necessarily as safe as session variables. The reason being is that a user can set a cookie themselves. So they could say, I'm logged in, right? We would make it very difficult for them because obviously their details that they store in the cookie would not be what we're looking for, but they could fake it. So that's an important thing to understand. That session variables are by far more secure than cookie variables. But we will be looking at both. So the first thing we need to do in order to access a session is to start the session. So we do it by calling session start. A couple of things to note about session start. You can only call session start before anything else has rendered to the page. If you call session start after you have attempted to render your HTML, it will throw an error. So if I refresh, no error. But if I echo something out, echo, I broke this, and I refresh, I'm getting I broke this. That's kind of funny that I'm not getting the session start error. Hold on, let me try to put it somewhere lower. Let me try to put it in the body here. Crazy. Maybe it changed. Maybe my Apache server is acting weird. Anyways, you're supposed to actually set your session start before you send your headers. That's a super important idea because what can happen is your session has started, your headers are gone, you're not accessing the session that's currently in place. So you need to call session start before you send your headers. It doesn't matter where on the page you call it, as long as you call it before you send any HTML or any output. That being said, though, this is making me out to be a liar, so maybe I'm wrong. The next thing we want to do is we're going to actually access a session variable, and we're going to store its value in something called form values. Whoops. So we're going to create a session variable, and we're going to store its values in here. And the session variable we're looking for, we're going to call form values as well. However, if this isn't set, right, if I just do this and I hit refresh, Can't do it because it says undefined index form values. It's basically saying that this index doesn't exist. And that's true. We haven't created this anywhere, right? I didn't go somewhere and call $_session form values equals something. So how do we handle this? Well, there's a few different ways we can do that. We can do it the super long way, which is calling isSet, like so. We can do it as a ternary, right? So use the question mark, and if it's set, then we can output session form values. Otherwise, null. Like that completely works, right? See? Error goes away. Everybody's happy. That's one way to do it. But the much simpler way to do this, and the real nice shorthand to do this, is using the OR operator that PHP provides us. This automatically checks to see if this is set, and if it's not, then it returns the null value instead. So nice shorthand solution to a ternary or an if-else condition. So the other thing to note, session variables persist. They always stick around. They will persist for the length of time that your browser is open. So for the entire life cycle of your browser. Once you close your browser, the session variables disappear. The problem is that the form values that I want to collect, I don't want to populate this form and then if the user hits refresh, populate it again because I've stored these values in here. It's important that we clear the values each time. We don't want to keep them around. We want to set them, clear them, and then let the next submission of the form set them again. Right? So we want to make sure we're clearing it each time we access the form. So the way we can do that is by simply using unset, which allows us to unset a variable. And we are going to unset session form values. So that will unset whatever value is in there. Now there is another thing called session unset, but the problem with session unset is it will actually unset the whole session, which you don't want to do. You want to keep your session, you just want to unset those form values. So this little chunk of code is going to help us basically repopulate our form. Now I can't remember if I've already added the value fields in here. Yes, I have. So I already have these value fields in here. This little chunk of code is basically going to take the value from form values, and it's going to be an associative array because it's literally just going to be the post object reassigned to form values. So we're going to access first name if it exists. Otherwise, we're going to access null, hence why these things are empty. Now you will notice that Sean McKinnon is here and password is here, but that's because my one password is actually logged in right now, and it's causing that issue. It's basically making it so that they automatically pre-populate. Okay. So otherwise, registration is ready to go. We are ready to register. So if we can type in our names, type in our email addresses, and make sure you do the confirmation as well because those two will need to be the same. Probably nothing new to you though. You've probably seen it before. And your password, whatever super secure password you want. And then hit register, and it will hit a blank page. Now, let's see if you guys can figure this out. Where did it send our request? Where did our request go? What file are we now in that we will need to go edit? Yeah, exactly. Insert PHP. Insert PHP will be where we actually do our editing. So now I did modify this course a little bit. Not a ton, just a little bit. Just want to grab my files here. There we go, just so I can find the modifications. Alright, so yeah, we're going to insert.php. So if you open up insert.php, you'll see we have a whole bunch of things we need to do, right? Lots and lots and lots of stuff we need to do. You can get rid of the include the reCAPTCHA config because we're not going to be dealing with that. And also the validate reCAPTCHA, because we're not going to deal with that. We're not doing reCAPTCHA in this class. They're doing it in the other class. All right. The first thing we're going to do is build an error handling function, because I'm a lazy programmer and I don't want to type things out 90 times. I want it to just kind of handle the things I need it to handle. Okay? Right. So to do that, we're going to create a function at the top of our page called error handler. It's going to have a parameter called errors, which will be an array incidentally. We're going to check to see if the session has started. We are not going to assume it has started. Sometimes when we're accessing things, when we start including other files, or if we're calling session somewhere else in our script, and then we were to call this function somewhere else, and sessions had already started, it will blow up. You can't have session start twice on a page. So I'll show you what I mean. So here's session start. There it is again. You're going to get an error telling you it's already been started. So the easiest way to get around that error or never incur it is to just create a simple if condition that checks the session status to see if it's already running. And we use a built-in variable that PHP provides us called PHP session none. And if it's not running, then we start it. Now, because this is all on one line, these curly braces are completely optional. We don't need them. And I do prefer to just run it on one line. It's kind of JavaScript-esque for me, but I do like it. The next thing we want to do is this errors array is going to contain a bunch of errors in it, right? So if I want to actually execute some sort of handling based on the fact that there were errors, all I need to do is count it. And if I count the errors and they're greater than 0, then I'm going to execute some sort of error handling. So the first piece of error handling I'm going to do is assign some session variables. I'm going to take my form values, and I'm just going to make the post object, I'm just going to assign it the post object. That means anything inside the post object that they sent to me is now a part of this session form values, which you'll remember. Actually, do I have a picture of it? Kinda, not really. Yeah, so kind of here you can see it. So here's our session form values. So the user clicks submit. It creates this post object. This post object goes to insert.php. If it's valid, it'll send us off to login. So that's if we've managed to get through the whole script and the insert worked. Otherwise, it takes our post object, these values, assigns it to session form values, and sends it back to register.php. So register.php takes that session form values and assigns it to form values. And then we unset it. So that's where all of that interconnection is happening. So we're going to assign that session variable. We're also going to store our errors, and we'll create something to handle those. But we're going to store our errors in a session variable called errors, and then we're going to redirect back to register for that person to deal with their problem. And we'll exit. And the reason we're exiting, does anybody know why we're exiting? I think we've talked about this once before. Why do we exit? Why is it important after we redirect to exit the page? Yeah. Kind of. Yeah, you're close, Gerline. What will happen is if we don't exit, the rest of the page will continue to execute even though we've redirected to a different page. Doesn't matter. The rest of the page will just continue to execute. So that's important to understand. So here's our wonderful error handling function. It's going to handle all of our errors for us. So now that we have that, we don't need to see it. So I'm not sure if you know how to do code collapsing, but if you hover next to your line numbers, usually there's a little arrow there. You can click it and it collapses it to kind of get it out of your way. So we're going to create an array to hold all the field errors. So I've already created that for you. This is just a simple array. Basically, any errors we get, we're going to shove into here, not necessarily just field errors. So the first thing we want to do is collect all of our fields. Now, we haven't done this in this class. This is kind of unique, but there's a way to actually grab all the fields, and even if they're empty, it will actually still create the variable. It will just set it to null. We can also actually validate our fields while we're going through to ensure that they're in the valid format, which is pretty handy. So let's go through that. So we're going to do first name equals filter input, and filter input takes up to 3 arguments. The first argument is where to find the value. So it looks at input post, which is the equivalence to our $_post. Basically the same idea. Then we tell it what property inside there that we're looking for. What key are we looking for? Well, we're looking for the first name key. Then we're going to do the same thing with last name. And we'll do the same thing with email. But with email, we're going to add one extra piece to this. We're going to add filter validate email. And what that will do is it will actually validate the email address. Whoa, that's too big. It'll validate the email address is in the correct format. If it's not in the correct format, it will actually set email to null. Or false, actually. Sorry, it will set the email to false. We need email confirmation as well. And we can add the filter validate there, but it's not really necessary. But I mean, we might as well. Here, I'll just collapse this sidebar so you can see the whole line, just because it's kind of big. Then we have password. And I don't think there's any filter validates for a password. Nope, Boolean, domain, email, nope, nothing that we want. We could, if we wanted to, create a regular expression validation and actually make it so that if the password doesn't match a certain pattern, that we just reject it. And there we go. We have all of the fields that we're going to need to validate. Or sorry, all the fields that we're going to need to run through. Right now, they're temporarily validated based on format. They are not validated based on actual containing data. One thing that's kind of weird with filter input, if it finds first name but the value is not there, it will actually store it as an empty string inside there. The next check we want to do is validate whether or not the required fields are empty. Well, I don't want to type all those out again, so I'm just going to double click on them. Hold down Alt, double click the next one, double click the next one, double click the next one, the next one. Do that again, do that again. So I've got all of 6 of these highlighted. I'm going to hit Control C. And then I'm going to say $required fields equals this array. I'm going to space it out and hit Control V. Paste it all in place, right? Then I'm going to hit Control and Alt and press up. So it creates multiple cursors for me. I'm going to hit Home, Shift Tab, and then tab it back in so that it puts it where it needs to be. I want to highlight these entire expressions. Well, I guess I can just do function shift. Or sorry, shift and end. So it highlights them. Hit my quote character key. Put my cursor at the very, very end. Hit comma. And remove that trailing one at the bottom because it will glitch. Little handy shorthands like this are super, super important to learn as you're developing with your IDE. because you will hit a point where somebody tells you one day that you're slow. I've been told that before. So I learned how to use my ID better so that I was not slow. Once we have that, we can write the for each loop. What the for each loop is going to do is it's going to go over the required fields, pass each one of those values into a variable called field, and then we can check that. So we're going to say if empty $field, which, by the way, field, if it's empty, if it's null, if it's whatever, then it will be, if it's null, empty, or false, it will actually all validate empty as true. But the thing is field is just this string, it's not this variable. So how can I access this variable when all I have is a string? Well, that's where we get to use something very cool in PHP called variable variables, which you put an extra $sign in front. And it's almost as if you did this, which matches that. That's the equivalence to what you just did. And they're called variable variables. Super cool things. We want to make this fairly human readable because we have a lot of underscores, and humans don't read underscores, even though we should probably give them a little bit more credit than that, but just in case. People get freaked out by things like underscores or anything that looks too computery, right? That's a term, computery. String replace takes 3 arguments. It takes the needle that you're looking for, or the pattern that you're looking for, the thing you want to replace the needle with, and the haystack or place that you're looking for it in, right? So that would be the equivalence to one of these. Notice I'm not putting the $sign in front of this one, and the reason why is because I want it to be the string, not the variable, right? I want it to be the string because what I'm going to say is $errors. I'm going to use the shorthand method for push. You cannot leave the, and we'll use some string interpolation here, blank. So that adds that new error onto our errors and tells them you cannot leave that password or first name, last name, email, email confirmation, password, or password confirmation blank. So that brings us into validating the email is in the correct format. So the easiest way to do this is just to check to see if it's false, because if the validation fails on the input post, it actually returns false. So if that happens, and we can write this on one line because it's just one statement, the email isn't in a valid format. Or we could just say the email needs to be in a valid format. That's probably a little bit more precise. We can also check to see if the email matches the email confirmation, as that is a requirement for us. So if, we can't do email without a $sign in front of it. Sorry about that. Make sure you put a $sign. I've been writing JavaScript all day. There's no $signs in JavaScript. If email does not equal $sign email confirmation, then same thing again, $sign errors. The email must match the email confirmation. By the way, if you don't like it when it gets too long like that, what you can do, and you still don't want to add the curly braces, you can hit enter and tab it in. That is also common convention that you will see. And you don't need to add the curly braces because only the next line is picked up. Even if it's like, even if it's like that, it's still picked up. The tabbing has no effect on it. It's just the next line. However, echo true, this will be, even though it's tabbed in like that, it doesn't matter. It won't be a part of this bundle. It won't be a part of this scope. It's actually outside of the scope. So just keep that in mind. Super cool shorthand, but it's important to understand how they work. Alright, so now we're going to validate that the password matches the email or the password confirmation. I mean, why not just copy and paste, because we already have written it. So copy, paste. I'm going to hit Control. I've highlighted the word email. I'm going to hit Control D, Control D, Control D, and change that to the word password. And I've done them all at the same time. And then at the very end of this, I'm now ready to check to see if there's errors. Because if there's any errors above, I want them processed. But the cool thing is, it's just our error handler. We call our error handler, and we pass it the errors array. And if there's any errors, it will handle it and send us back to wherever we need to go. So very nice. That's the end of our validation. Now we need to go through our normalization process, which would be basically just normalizing the fields of our names, right? Which is super easy. We can just literally write a quick for each loop here. We'll pass it a array literal. So we're just literally passing the array directly in. We're not assigning it to a variable first. Like so. And then all we want to do is just basically lowercase everything, right? So if we have first name, we want to make it equal string to lower, $_post, $field, like so. Nope, that's not it. $first name. Oh, right, I can't do that. So I have to do $field, $field. That's what we have to do. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong instructions here. And then same thing, I want to make it all capital letters. So we'll do UC words, $field. And that will capitalize everything for us. With the email address, I just want to lowercase it. So I'm just going to say $email equals string to lower, $email. And that will lowercase our email for us. And then we're ready to hash our passwords. So passwords, right, when we get them from people, we don't want them to be in raw text. We don't want to take a password and store it in our database in raw text. That would be bad. Why would it be bad? Because in the off chance somebody hacks our database and all our passwords are sitting in raw text inside our database, that hacker now has access to all the emails and passwords for every user inside our application. That's bad. That's lawsuit bad. That's like get sued out the wazoo bad. Like flee the country because they're going to take everything you have and throw you in jail bad. So you want to make sure you hash the password, right? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take password and we're going to make it equal to password hash, which is built right into PHP for us. Super handy. We pass it the password we want to hash. Then we tell it the encryption we want to use, the algorithm we want to use. So by default, the algorithm is bcrypt, which is perfectly fine for our needs. We don't need anything too crazy. The other thing that password hash will do is it will provide a salt. So essentially it runs through the algorithm, it takes this random string, and it encodes it into our password. So every time you save a brand new password, even if they're identical, they won't be the same in the database. So say every user you create uses the password test. It doesn't matter. Every one of them will have a different string inside the database because of the salt key. The salt key gets generated and it automatically converts that text into something completely different. And it does it based on the timestamps. Right? It uses the timestamps to be able to do it. But however, we can always verify our password later on using the other function, the sister function to this, which is called password verify. And that's the counter function for it. So that will hash our password for us. Now we're into database things, and then we'll take a break after that. So we're going to require once our connect.php. Oh, I guess I should give you the code above. Sorry, guys. Usually I do that. Here's all the code above. There you go. I will share this on a paste bin after this. Then we want to actually connect to our database. So we'll just create a variable called con, and we'll call our function DBO. We should probably go check that and make sure that the connect is actually correct. So if you hit Control P and type in connect, you can open up your connect.php function. The database is not that database. We called it the registry. So we need to change it to the registry. That should be the only line unless your password and username are different. Make sure you change those as well. And then once you've done that, go back to insert.php. So we're going to write a chunk of SQL here. $SQL equals, I like that, SQL equal. And we're going to do insert into users values, like so. And then what I like to do is I like to put my cursor there and my cursor here and hit split. This one's going to be first name, last name, email address, password, right? That's all we really care about. I'm going to hold down Alt and click on these and copy them. And then I'm going to paste them in place here. Hit Alt, Control, and up. Shift tab them so they're all against the far wall. And then I'm just going to put the colon on the end of them and put a comma. But make sure you remove the comma after password because PHP does not support at all, even in a little bit, does not support trailing commas. So that's cool. That's our SQL. Now we're ready to actually prepare our SQL before we start doing our bindings. So statement equals $con prepare $SQL. And that will prep it, get it ready for us to send off to MySQL. Yeah, yes. If we refresh right now, we should still have no errors on the page, but nothing is actually happening yet. All right, so what's our next step? We're going to do some bindings, right? So statement bind param. We'll bind first name, which will be connected to the first name variable. Don't know why it lost that. And we're going to sanitize it by casting it to a string, which will auto-sanitize it and strip out any bad stuff inside of it. We'll do the same thing with the last name. And param string. We'll do it again. Bind param. Email address. Whoops. $ last name. Or sorry, email. Why is it giving me the wrong things? PDO, param. I'm kind of curious if there's email in here. I don't think there is. No, it's just string. Can only validate it against a string, which is fine. Bind param. Password. $password. And this you don't want to do the PDO param string on because you don't want any sanitization to happen to this. So don't add PDO param string because it could convert it to on you and then you wouldn't have a proper string. I think you're probably fine because bcrypt actually uses numbers and letters. It doesn't use symbols, I don't think, but if it used symbols, this would filter it and you would wind up with an issue. So the next thing we want to do is insert our row, right? So we need to actually execute. So $statement, execute. And now That's it. All our SQL is up in the database. So there's all our statement interactions. The last thing we want to do is check for some more errors, just to make sure there are no errors that returned by SQL. SQL will return errors, but it doesn't tell you. You have to check. The first thing we want to check is to see whether or not we accidentally attempted to create a duplicate user. And we can do that by looking for the code 2300, which is a string, incidentally, not a number. If we did, we're going to add an error that says you have already registered as a user. There you go. And we can get rid of these curly braces. They aren't necessary because it is just single lines that we're going to be writing. Oops. We can write our else if here as well on a single line, which is kind of neat. $ statement, error code does not equal 00000, so 5 zeros, then $errors. There was an error during registration. And we can get that error code. I can't remember how though. Oh, I forgot an equals sign here. There we go. Else, we're ready to add something different. So we're going to add to a session variable some successes, which means we will need to do a session start because we haven't done a session start prior to this. So we can actually add a set of curly braces here. And we'll move it, oh, sorry, I meant to move it down, and we'll call session start, just in case session start didn't get called. And then we're going to say equal, you have been registered successfully, like so. Then we can set the header, location, whoops, needs to be in quotations, location, login.php. So we'll actually just redirect them to the login so they can log in, and we'll exit our app. Otherwise, we're going to respond with our errors if there was any. So if count $errors. I mean, there's going to be. I don't know why we're doing it like that. We can't get here unless there's errors. So error handler, $errors. So that's another reason why we want to exit. Otherwise, this would execute, right? We don't want it to execute. We want to hit the bottom without it executing. All right, if I refresh, it should create my user and take me back to the login page. Yep, sure enough. So I will copy this file and I will give it to you as a paste bin. Just give me a second to create it. And there you are. So just to quickly recap the whole thing, we built an error handler to help us just deal with errors, much easier to work with errors. It automatically adds errors to our session. We will output these errors in a new method called notification, but we haven't created that yet. We have an errors array so that we can store our errors. Geez, it's hard to say. We're using the filter input to be able to pull information from our post, but without using the $post. Filter input allows us to be able to pull information and validate at the same time as we're going through. So that's what we're doing there. We validate the necessary fields are not empty. I didn't change much. I just changed the database that we were pointing to the dash registry. But you need to change your username and password if it's different, Marcos. So then I had to validate the necessary fields are not empty, so these are all considered not empty. Then we iterate over those and we use variables, super cool, fun things in order to actually check to see if it is empty, the value. We validate that our email is in the correct format. We validate that the email matches the email confirmation. We validate that the password matches the password confirmation. If there are any errors, we throw our error handler and we redirect back to registry. We validate the first name and last name, and we modify them so that we cast them to a lowercase string, and we capitalize the first letters of each of those so that it kind of just balances out. Then we do a string to lower. We pass our password, or we hash our password. We hash our password and store it all together. We connect to our database, we run this SQL query, we bind our parameters. All this shouldn't be new, this should all be familiar. The only thing that's new is this chunk here, which is basically allowing us, this piece right here basically allows us to check to see if the database threw in like an incorrect email address, or not incorrect email, sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? If the user exists. If it's not unique, then we can wind up with that problem. So let's just take a quick look what happens if I try to fill this out again with the same information, right? I'm just going to copy and paste it in the other one, even though you're not really supposed to do that. All right. Oh, I think I actually need 2 tests. There we go. If I register, it's going to throw an error because we should hit this "you have already registered as a user," but you're not going to see it. It will just redirect us back. But you can see that we did get the 2300 integrity constraint. We're getting a duplicate error, and it's throwing the PDO exception. So that being said, we likely need to wrap this thing in a try-catch. Yeah, we'll need to wrap it in a try-catch, but we'll do that after our break. So why don't we take a break till 8:40, and then we'll start back up again, and we'll see where we get to before we need to call it for a night. Why we made start a new session in the last. Didn't we already start one? No, you didn't. Here's your session. What is your session in right now? What is this session start currently contained in? Yeah, and what is error handler? I know that, but what is the structure called? A function, right. This function doesn't execute unless we call it. So if you go through our code, right, error handler errors only gets called, right, if there's errors. And this if condition is only executed. Oh, geez, I see what you're saying, actually. Haha, you are correct. We are calling it. We are 100% calling it. Good catch, Manjinder. Let's dump that guy down inside there, that if condition. And then it doesn't call it. So if there's no errors, we don't ever call this, which is fine. And if there are errors, we do call it. But if there's no errors, we will get all the way to this session start and it will get called no problem. The reason why it didn't cast an error is because we errored out here. So we never saw that error. But yeah. Sorry, Stepan, show line 68. Yep, I can show you line 68. Alright, I'm going to pause just so we don't record the whole... Alright. Let's, we're going to take this on until we hit about, say, 9:20 or so, and then we'll call it a night. That's just over 2 hours. This is a lot to encapsulate all in one evening. The first thing we need to do, though, is fix this, because right now we're throwing an error, and it's going to get thrown no matter what, so we should do a try-catch. So what we'll do is the try error is happening on this statement here. So we will do a try here, like so. And then we will catch it, which will be a PDO exception. And we'll store that in an error, like so. So kind of a tricky one because the exception's a little different. We want to capture this exception here, right? That's the exception we're looking for. So we're going to execute it, capture in that statement, and then we're essentially going to just process these two pieces here. So we're going to say, if that happens, go ahead and figure out what you need to do for these two things, right? So if the error code happens to be 2300, then you have this. Else if it's this, then do this. And then if those things happen, we'll execute our error handler. So we'll move it up so that it's in here. So it's in our try catch now. And then otherwise, we can cut all of that out, like so, and it can go into here, like so. So let's copy that and replace that whole bottom section where it said statement execute, replace it with that. So it should work if I refresh. Okay, it shoved me back, but we don't get the error message, but that's good. We are getting an error message, you just can't see it. And it did send me back. So if I try test, 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 register, no, I'm getting shoved back. So this try catch is definitely catching our error. All right, so what's the next thing that we're going to do? Well, now that we've got that, we really do need to implement the notification system so that we can actually see our notifications when they happen. Notice though, see how all this is getting filled out? What is doing that wonderful magic for us? Does anybody remember? What's doing the wonderful magic of auto-filling out this form for us? How is that currently working? Yeah, exactly. Form something close enough. But yeah, you're right, Manjinder. That's exactly why, because it's actually filling it out. So the one thing we should test just to make sure everything is working properly is that we are actually unsetting these form values if we refresh the page. So if you refresh the page, see, everything cleared, right? If it didn't clear, then you forgot to add this line, which is super important. All right, so we're going to work on notification, and what the notification system is essentially going to do is it's going to make it so that we can actually see notifications on any page we're in. Doesn't matter what the page is, we'll see the notification. So open the notification.php page. So the first thing we're going to do is check to see if our session has started, and if it isn't, then we will go ahead and start it. So session start, or sorry, session status. If that equals php underscore session none, then do a session start. Nice and simple. And we need to do that because we're actually looking for those success messages or those error messages. We want to see if they exist. So we're going to store each of those because there is a potential chance that we could have error messages and success messages. So we'll store them in there like that. And we'll store our successes as well. Successes. Hard to say. Session. There we go. I think I just hit my caps lock accidentally. I did. And there we go. And then once we've done that, just like we did with the form values, we want to clear them. So we'll unset both of them. And that will clear those values for us. So now we have a variable with errors in it and a variable with successes in it, or potentially with those in it. Now we're ready to build our small little visual display, because this isn't a processing page, this is a view page. So we're going to do a for each, we're going to do an if condition, inline if condition. that will handle it for us. So $errors, we're checking to see if there are errors, like the errors variable is set. And we want to count the errors and make sure they're greater than 0. So if their errors are greater than 0, so if we have errors and the errors are greater than 0, then we can go ahead and do div.alert. This is bootstrap stuff. Danger. There we go. That'll create a danger div for us. And then in one line, we're going to write a for each statement, which you guys have not seen before. But this is so nice and clean. $signs errors as error. Like so. Echo. And we'll just put the error on one line, the $sign error. And we'll add a BR tag to it as well. And then for the successes, it's exactly the same. So I'm just going to go Alt-Shift down, or, ooh, why didn't I think of that before? No, we're going to get cheeky. We're going to get cheeky, folks. Watch this cheekiness. You guys know what I'm going to do? Do you have an idea? So now instead of errors, we're going to call these $var using the, whatchamacallit, the variables. And instead of error here, we'll just do message like that. That works. Why don't we call these messages? Or types. That's better. Type. I like type. There. That's better. That's much more legible. Yeah, I will in 1 second. Don't worry. I realize it's a little confusing. Okay, so what we're doing is the first thing we're doing is checking to see our session status. If our session status is PHP session none, that means our session is not currently operational, so we're going to start it, right? And the reason why we're doing this is because this notification is actually going to get included in our other pages. So because it's being included, we don't know if the session is running or not. We're storing the errors, so if there are any session errors, this isn't session errors, sorry, that's the wrong terminology. If there's any errors that are stored in the session, we're going to assign them to the errors variable here. Same with successes, we're going to just assign it to a successes variable. Then we unset both of them, which means after a page refresh, these errors disappear, or these messages disappear. This wonderful bit of rocket science. So the first thing we're doing is just iterating over an array called errors and successes. It is not coincidence that this string matches the name of this variable. That is intentional, okay? The reason is because it's going to allow us to take advantage of variables built into PHP. What will happen is the first time we run through, errors, right, is going to get assigned to type here. This will be the value of errors. When we add an extra $sign in it, it now becomes the variable and whatever value the variable contains. So that's what we're referencing here. We're actually referencing this variable and its value. Then we check the count to see how many errors are sitting inside this value. If it's greater than 0, then we go ahead and output this alert, right? The alert also needs to go over the array of errors and then fetch each one of the messages currently stored in that array and echo it out as a message. So the variables can be kind of confusing, but the idea of them is basically it is a string, right, that we want to treat as the name of a variable. So it's our way to dynamically access a variable. It's super handy. It makes for super, super clean code because you can reduce your code a lot and reduce redundancy. If you're not a fan of that, the other way to write it, which I'll just copy and paste, is like this, where you see how we have duplicated code here. So we have our errors out. This is fairly self-explanatory what this is doing. Same with the successes, but now we have two duplicated blocks, right? I'll copy and paste that for you in case that's the way you want to do it. That's totally fine. However, I'm totally for dryness and believing to try to keep things as dry as possible, which means write once, not twice. This is a lot easier to maintain. All right, let's see if we can get it to trigger. Oh, we can't get it to trigger yet. We need to add it. So right now we'll just deal with the registration. We won't worry about any other pages. So if we go to register.php, we want to include our notification page. Oh, it's already included. Nice. It's already included on line 24 for us. So we don't need to do that. So I'll just leave this open here for you. So I'm going to go ahead and try to fill this thing out. Sorry, what? Can't we write errors, successes instead of error successes and not use the $? I suppose you could. Yeah, actually you totally could. Why did I make that so much more convoluted than it needed to be? As type, as type. As type. Yeah, Minjinder, you're 100% right. We didn't need to make it that convoluted. Yeah, no, that completely works. Errors, successes, that totally works. There we go. Long day. Been working since 5:30 this morning. I don't know why the more tired I get, the more convoluted I get when I write code. Alright, so I've filled this out. I'm about to hit register, and I should see my notification at the top of the page. See? You have been registered successfully. Well, that's definitely not the notification I should be getting. Right? We should be getting something different. Oh, you cannot leave the password blank. You cannot leave the password confirmation blank. That's fine. Register. The password must match the password confirmation. Did it not? You have already registered as a user. There we go. So we're getting all of our messages. Oh, there is one problem with this particular scenario. Even if we register successfully, it's going to be in a danger. So we're not getting the correct data type each time, which is kind of a little crappy. There is a way around that, though. That's where the variables would have came in, because we could check to see if it was errors or successes and spit out the correct one. I mean, we'll fix that next week. We won't fix it this week. Alright, so we've covered lots tonight. We have created the ability to create a registered user. If you check in your database, you should have a registered user now. So if you right-click on the thing and select rows, you should see a registered user. How come I can zoom that in, but I can't zoom this one in? I want to zoom in. It won't let me. So I have one row right now with Sean.McKinnon in it and my password in it. You're getting email must match, but they do. You're 100% positive that they do? Yep. abc@gmail.com, abc@gmail.com. Okay, let's walk through how to troubleshoot that. If we go to insert.php, right? Let's scroll down to where we have our emails saying that they don't match, which is right here. Right above that, what you should do, Manjinder, is var dump $email, $email confirmation, like so. and then exit so that it doesn't wind up, spitting it out. Then go ahead and hit register, and you should see the 2 email addresses, and if you're correct, they should match. Nothing moves where I expect it to move to. There. Okay, I'll deal with you in a second. So they're both 23 characters. Okay. So did you do not equals, or did you accidentally do equals, equals, equals? So look at your condition check. You spelled email wrong. That's why. I mean, phonetically it makes sense. Well, no, because it's email, not email. I was looking at my email address the other day, and it's my Hotmail one. It's to the root of hotmail.ca. And I said to my wife, I said, it's kind of funny if Hotmail, right, which is owned by Microsoft, if they ever decided they wanted to go into a different business, they could go into an escort service, and they could still just keep the same address, Hotmail, right? Do you get it? Totally makes sense. I don't think that was their original intention with the address, though. Where's the other error I saw up here? Mine doesn't give error if password is blank. So if your password is empty, hold on, let me fill this out. ASDF, ASDF, ASDF at ASDF.com, ASDF at ASDF.com. I'm pretty sure I made sure that it did, but stop trying to fill things in. You cannot leave the password blank. You cannot leave the password confirmation blank. Okay, so if you're not getting the error then, Gurleen, what it could be, it can be one of two things. Either the password and password confirmation are both empty, so they're automatically being treated as though they have, do you know for sure you're getting your password? Have you done a var dump? So you should run a var dump of $password and $password confirmation, and then exit directly after that so that you can see it. So if you register, it should say they're both blank, right? So there shouldn't be anything in there if that's working. Are they blank? Or I can even give you the code. Okay. So that's good if they're both blank. Does not equal, blah, blah, blah. Make sure in the required fields you have password and password confirmation in there. Do you have those two fields in your required fields list? Okay. And does your code here look exactly the same as mine? Because that's the thing that does it. Alright, you're gonna have to share your screen. I have no idea what's happening. I'm gonna stop recording though.